Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our last ISM Lunch and Learn for March 2017. Today we're going to be looking at the Visual Integrator module with our consultant, Mr. George Warchie. Please excuse my voice. I'm battling a cold, but it's coming back well. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. You will be on mute throughout the presentation in order to block out background noise, etc. If you have questions, please feel free to utilize the chat window on your toolbar, and we will be opening up at the end of the presentation for questions. So with all of that, I'm going to turn everything over to George. George, welcome and thank you.
All right, good morning. So my name is George. I'm one of the senior consultants here at ISM. We're going to go ahead and discuss Visual Integrator and the functions of Visual Integrator and what you can do with Visual Integrator as far as data integration, importing, exporting, things of that nature. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. What I want to do is just kind of talk about some of the functions that we use Visual Integrator for. So typically what we can do with Visual Integrator, what I see it used for a lot, is to manipulate data on a mass scale. A lot of people will, want to do a price update or a change, a customer ship-to address or something of that nature. Visual Integrator is a really powerful tool for doing that function. What we're going to do is walk through some of the functions of exporting and some of the functions of importing, and then I'll open it up for questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and, if everybody can see my screen here, we're going to go into the module section of Sage and do Visual Integrator. And I'm going to go ahead and do an export job first because I want to export out a record so we can kind of see what the record looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Export Job. I'm just going to call this a sales order. And I'm going to grab the table that's the sales order header. The nice thing about this is they kind of made it pretty user-friendly, so you can roll through it pretty easy. You can grab the table names just by clicking the module code that you want to get into. So if you click on SO, you can get right in, and then go down to SO orders. One of the other things that I like about Visual Integrator is when you're pulling into certain files or records, it'll actually link the header and the detail or the line item level to the record. So right here I selected the sales order header, and people might say, well, how am I going to get my line detail in there? One of the nice things about this is that it comes in. When it comes in, you can kind of see here on the data side where you can select the line item level. We'll discuss that more in the importing where it makes a little bit more sense, but for now I'm just going to set up a simple export of the data so we can get some records to play with. So in here I'm just going to basically set up the configuration. I told it what table name I'm using. I can tell it what type of file I want to use, whether I want to use a delimited, whether I want to connect directly to an ODBC table. And that can be beneficial if you're using like a SQL database, or if you're pulling like data you want to export out from like an access table or something of that nature. So in this case, I'm just going to use a delimited file. I'm going to make the delimiter a comma because that's typically the most common delimiter. You might see a delimiter of a quotation or something like that, but for our purposes, we're going to use the comma. And we'll discuss a little bit more about this on the import side. I want to talk a little bit about delimiters because some people in Excel will have on their imports, like I said, they'll have a quotation mark or something like this, and that's how their data is delimited depending on what system they're coming out of. So we'll discuss that a little bit more on the import job. But for now, let's just go ahead and do this export. I'm just going to name it, give it a file location to save it to, and for all our purposes here, I'll just save it to the desktop and I'll just call it SO export. And I'm going to go ahead and accept it. And then I'm going to select the fields. So one of the things that you can do here is just insert all the records that you're going to export. you can do that just by clicking on the item here, like sales order number, and then just keep clicking the arrow. It does it in order. So you're going to be able to pull out all this information just like this. And I'm pulling out everything. You don't necessarily have to pull out everything. For an export, you can kind of pick and choose, kind of like in Crystal, what you want to pull out. So it's kind of nice that you can do that. Now on the import, there will be some required fields in there, but we'll discuss that when we get into the import side. And so that should be it. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the selection real quick. Selection would be kind of like in Crystal, how if you're familiar with Crystal, you can define parameters to pick export items. So let's say I had a bunch of sales orders in the system and I only wanted to pull out, certain sales orders for a certain customer. I can do a selection in here and say I only want to pull out, this customer number is equal to, Walmart or whatever the customer number is. So from an export standpoint on the selection side, it's a nice little feature that lets you be able to select criteria based on what you want to export. For this purpose, we're going to export everything, so I'm just going to leave it blank. The same thing for sort. Sort does the same function. It basically lets you sort the data in the format that you want. So you can kind of go through here and say, I want to see the sales order first by, sales order number and ascending order, and then I want to see the order date, and then I might want to see the AR division and customer. So it lets you sort the table and the file that you're going to export in the format that you choose. For our purposes, I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to leave it at blank and just pull it out that way. So with this set, now I have my configuration here. I have my data set. I don't have any selections and I don't have any sorts. Let's come back to the configuration tab. You can set a password on the export. So for example, let's say that you had a person that was able to access Visual Integrator, but you didn't want them to export any kind of customer records, for security reason, or maybe you didn't want them to be able to get into the payroll tab or, export out payroll tabs. You could set passwords up on the job configuration tab here. So let's go ahead and run this. When I hit accept on this job, it's going to ask me a couple of things. It's going to ask me to execute the job, and then it gives me a couple of different options. So it's going to ask me, are you sure this is where you want to export it? And also down at the bottom, I have a couple different options I can look at. I can go back to the job maintenance screen, obviously. I can look at the log once it's available to us after a test or an accept. If I click on test, it'll let me select amount of records to test without actually affecting the data. So if I wanted to test this, I could hit test, select the number of records, and sometimes if you're importing or exporting quite a bit of records, you may want to do a test because you just want to kind of make sure you're not getting any errors or anything before you do the export or the import. The job test is on the export feature and on the import feature. So in this case, I know there's only one record in there, so I'm just going to select one in all records and then just do a little quick test. Apparently there's more records in there, but that's okay. So in here, it's reading out 21 records, and that's good. It just tells me what, that they were all exported successfully. So this is the part where I can look at the log. So here I can just kind of look and see, okay, there's record 1, 2, 3 down to 21. I can look at the results. If you had a failure, it would tell you what the failure was. It would come in here and it would be a big red mark and it would say, it failed because the data format is incorrect, or it failed because the order type doesn't exist, or it would give you some indication of why the job or the import is failing, and then you can go back to your spreadsheet. What I've seen in most cases is it's just a formatting error usually. A lot of times in Excel, people will do like an Excel spreadsheet where it's adding or dropping zeros, or not adding, the format is incorrect, and then they save it out as CSV and it doesn't save correctly or whatever. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in the import part. But It's kind of important to know because this is kind of how you can troubleshoot what is going on with your imports and exports. So in this case, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a simple export out, and there's not too much going on here. So I'm just going to go ahead and accept and hit OK. So the test went through successfully. Now I know it's going to be OK. I'm going to accept it, and it's just going to ask me if I want to export. I'm just going to say yes. So again, then it gives you a log when you actually do the record, and then it should create the file. And it did over here, so you can see off to our left, here's the file that it created. So I'm just going to open this with Notepad, and we can kind of see, what it looks like here. So this is just a simple, quick way, a down and dirty way to do the export function. A lot of people will utilize Crystal to do this function. It can be done through this Visual Integrator as well, and it's pretty intuitive. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You don't have to do any kind of Crystal linking or anything like that. There is one thing that I do want to talk about on the export part, and it's in regards to hidden fields. So for hidden fields, you may notice on some of the tables, and we'll do one as an example here, but you may notice on some of the tables that there's a hidden field or something you can't see. And I want to talk about that because it's important on these exports to understand what those hidden fields are and how to unlock them. So the most common one I can think of just offhand is GL export. So GL export, when you're doing a GL export or you're exporting GL information, there's a GL account key, and the account key is the identifier for the structure and the account code that you're using, as well as the actual account number. So let's go ahead and set up this GL export file. I want to show you kind of what it looks like when you're doing it through here, and the difference in Crystal in here. So if you look at the GL account, I'm going to pull it in. I'm just going to make sure I did that the right way. And I'm going to say, yes, it's a new job. Obviously, it's already got the table name in there. I'm going to stick to the pattern and do delimited, use my delimiter here, and then I'm just going to give it a file name called GL export. And I'm just going to save it to the desktop. You can save it to any location. However, if you save it to the server that mass is stored on, or you're saving it under the Sage directory, then you're going to need to check that box that says on server. Otherwise, you'll get error 81s and error 86s, and it's just a communication error. If you're getting that error, or you're getting any type of weird PVX error, chances are you just need to check this box, and that'll resolve that issue. So if you see in here right now, I've selected the GL account, and I've got account description, account information. I've got the date, start, the end, the status, the clear balance, and the cash flow step. But one of the key features in here is the GL key, the account key, and that's a real critical key. And you can see it's not here. So the question is where is it? And you can dig around for files, or you can come back to configuration, and you can click on this button here called options. And this additional options field, it gives you a few different options. The one we're going to be playing with is the display read-only fields for export. So when I check this box and I hit close, when I come back to the data tab, do you see now how many different keys and hidden fields there were in that GL account file? So now when I do this export, I can actually select these account keys, which are the critical identifiers to some of this GL importing, and I can just select my records and hit accept and execute the job. In this case, I'm not going to test it. I'm just going to accept through. I know it's going to pull it out, and then I can look at it. So you can see here, it pulls out the account key, pulls out the description, and then the physical, the one that you're used to, the 100-0000, or however you have your GL account set up. So it's a real critical piece to be aware of, So if you're ever in the process of doing an export or an import, and you're not seeing a record, you're not seeing a key, don't spend hours looking for it or trying to figure out what file it's in. Try looking at that box first and checking that clearing out the hidden feature and making the hidden fields available to you, and that'll save you a lot of time on that. So I did want to point that out because it's kind of critical. So we can come back over here and then we can look at this GL export. It's just going to look like a big chunk of data for us, but let's go ahead and take a peek at it. So you can see it's pulled out all the keys, pulled out the description, just like I said, and then it's pulled out the GL accounts and all the pertaining information. One of the things to look at here is how this data looks. So we're looking at this in standard Notepad. If you're going to be doing a lot of importing and exporting, I suggest downloading the tool. It's called Notepad Plus. I'm just going to show that to you real quick because it actually formats the data in a little bit more of an easy-to-read format. But it's basically this right here, Notepad Plus. It's this green website, and it's got the little frog and pencil. And what this does is it's more of a programming tool, but it actually formats the data in a real clean way to read it. So it's not so hard. So it's pretty clean. I like it. So just a quick little, advice there. All right, so let's go into the import side. So on the import side, you can see we created the exports and they're set up in the format that we want. So on the import side, let's discuss the options on the import side. So I'm going to create one called, let's just do a GL import. So we'll just give it a name called GL import. And we'll use the same table. We'll use the GL account table. And we'll just accept it. And we'll say, yes, that's a new job. We're going to set it up as a delimited file. Now, in here, when we're doing imports, if you noticed on the export side, there was only a few options as far as what you could export out to. So you had delimited, you had ASCII, and you had ODBC. On an import, you have a ton more options. And I'll discuss a little bit about these options because there are ways to pull data in not only from a delimited file, like a simple text file like we have over here, but there are ways to link the imports directly to like a SQL table or an ODBC table, or actually pulling it up through an actual Excel spreadsheet. So we can select these different objects here in the file type. And we can tell it, we want to link out to an ODBC data source and we want to go to a SQL table or whatever, we want to use as our ODBC data source. In this case, I'm just going to keep it simple and go with the delimited file. But basically, you do have a lot more options there. Now, if I were to select like Excel, obviously the delimiter goes away. It's just going to break it down by columns and rows. So if you have header rows and things of that nature, there are ways to exclude header rows, but typically what people will do is leave the header row in there and just realize that the first record that we're importing is going to be a failed record because it's all the header information for the file. So if you want to insert the header and you want to say the header is separate from the line, you can do things like this, where you can hit this box and set up a header record and a line record in the same Excel spreadsheet, and we can talk about that a little bit later. So another thing here we can do is we can insert all the required fields during setup. I'm kind of on the fence about this button. So if I click right now into the data tab, I get basically what I need as far as the required fields to pull in the data. Whether I pull the data in by replacing the column or by assigning the field, is completely up to me. If I check this box, then it does essentially the same thing. So I don't know, in some cases it's beneficial if you're in like a sales order file or a sales order history file. There's certain types of records that you absolutely have to import or either assign to be able to pull in the data. So in that regard, it could be beneficial to check this box. However, for the most part, when I'm doing a data cleanup or I'm doing a customer import of ship to addresses or pricing changes or things like that, I don't really mess with that field because I'll assign what I need to assign to make the import come in. So in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and select a file to import, and I'm basically just going to grab this GL export, and I'm just going to change it up a little bit, but I need to make sure that it's in the same type of format. So I'm going to pull this out, and I'm going to look at this. One of the things that I like to do is I like to bring up my Excel spreadsheet and kind of keep it with my table here so I can see kind of like how the data is laid out. So what I can see here is my first section is missing. So there's a big problem here. I don't have my account key, and that's the first record in my file. So again, I gotta figure out why isn't that showing up, right? In the import function, you'll see what's missing here is there isn't a place to put there isn't a hidden field section here. So in this case, on the import, you're gonna match to the account, not the account key. So how would I do an import for my GL account keys if they changed? You could use the GL Exchange or you could use Crystal. But basically, on the import side, there isn't a ton of options for showing those hidden fields. You can't import to a hidden field, essentially. So let's go ahead and pull in. We'll just change this up a little bit and pull in 1 or 2 records. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I'm going to go ahead and delete some of this stuff. So we just have a couple to work with. So in here, the first thing I have is account key. I know that this is account key because I made the file. So I don't have account key here, so I can't replace that column with anything in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the account key is this, because that really is the account for the job. So in here I'm going to say that my account is column 3. So if I see here that my account is column 3, but my replacement is column 1, I need to change that. So I'm going to click on this button, and I'm going to say, I'm replacing this column with column 3 from my file. And then I just hit OK. The other options here are assign, file assign, runtime assign, incremental assign, calculated, and next. And we're going to talk a little bit about these functions because during an import, I may not have every piece of data that I need, but it may exist in Sage already. So depending on what data is available to me, I can basically assign or replace or runtime assign or file assign. So let's discuss each one of those. So a replacement is obviously a replacement from a column in a file, whether it's delimited or whether it's a column of Excel, A, B, C, or D. You're still going to count it as a numeric value. So if it's column A, it's going to be 1, column B, column 2, and so on. So in a replace situation, I'm replacing the data from a file that I have on my system. When I assign something, I'm basically saying that it's a static function. I'm giving it the value. So in here I could say, well, I don't have this account, but I want it to be 1003-00-02. And that will pull in for all the records that are in there. It's going to ignore the column 3 in this file, and it's just going to assign 103002 to every field that's being pulled in. So that's how you assign a field to be imported that just basically skips over a value that's in the field. When I look at the file assignment basically goes in and looks at what is in Sage. You can reference out to a table name. Then you can reference out to the column name. So in this case, if I wanted to file assign the account number, obviously I'm going to file assign that from GL account, and I'm going to grab the key called account. And if I do it that way, then it's going to go through. When I run this import, it's going to go through, look for all the matching GL accounts, and assign that GL account to the assignment of that particular record. There is a little bit of a glitch in this system. If you change these out before you hit cancel or accept, you'll see that it keeps your default value there. So just make sure if you change it and you don't cancel out of it, and you change this from run to file or run to replace, to make sure you're checking that default account there. So let's talk about a runtime assign. A runtime assign is a assignment that happens when you generate the job. So when we talked about earlier how we click accept on the job, and then it says, do you wish to run this job? And you say yes. That's a runtime assignment. What it's going to do is it's going to pop up a field and say, hey, what's the value you want to use for this job for this particular field? And if you had, 6 or 7 different runtime assigns in there that you wanted to assign at the time of running the job, then you would have to populate all those 6 or 7 fields at that time, and that will pull it in. So I can show you that we could do a test on that so you can see kind of what it does. But when you do a runtime assign, you're going to want to give it a prompt and a default. So I could say that the runtime assign for account number would be my default account, which would be 100-100 or 100-00-00. And then I could say my prompt would be enter GL account. And then I would save that. And now every time I run this job, let's just run it. I'm going to show you because it's going to be cool to show it to you. So if I say yes here and I execute, you see here the first thing it does is a little bit different from that export where it shows you the file name it's exporting to. It also is now prompting you for enter GL account number. So I could say, okay, I don't want it to be 100-00, I want it to be 102-02-03. What it's going to do is it's going to write all those GL accounts to this account code. So kind of a cool little feature. I'm going to go ahead and go back to it and kill that. But I do want to show that to you on the runtime assign. So you have that option there to do that. And let's talk real quick now about incremental assignment. So an incremental assignment is basically like exactly what it says. You basically give it an increment, and you'll say like your default is 1, for example. Or you could say my default is 101. Now when I run this job, the next thing it's going to do is it's going to pull the first record as 101. Then it's going to pull this second column here as 102, and then 103, 104, and so on. So an incremental assignment, I don't usually see a lot of. I have used it in the past, but it's not very widely used. The biggest ones we typically use are a file or a runtime assign, or even a calculated. A calculated is a little bit more advanced. I'll touch base on it now, but a calculated is a conditional expression. So depending on the format of your Sage, you can use the condition builders and the calculation builders to build conditional expressions to pull in the data. So I could say, let's make it a calculated field, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on the calculation button. And I'm going to say, I only want to pull it in if this account number is equal to, 100-00-02. So it will run through the system and the file and see if it equals that field. And if it equals that field, then it'll pull it in. If it doesn't, it's not going to pull it in. Now, you can get real complicated on these conditional expressions and pull in keys and portions of keys. And I've done imports taking data from Excel, trimming out 3 of the digits off a code or for a ship-to code or an international code and pulling it in that way. So you can basically define out, like, okay, I want to grab this +3, or put in definitions on GL account codes. And we can have another class on conditional expressions in the Visual Integrator module, but for now, I'm just going to basically leave it at that so we can get through some of the other stuff. So that is a conditional expression. This is an example of it. It's pretty straightforward, but it can be very, very complex. So it's a nice function because you can really do some tricky stuff with it if you're wanting to pull in data every 15 minutes or so off a SQL table or something like that. It can be real helpful. So the next one down is what we call a next. And the next is, think of it like a batch. So if I was pulling in a sales order, for example, I could take a sales order and I could just make it equal to next. So I'm not assigning the sales order number. I don't have the sales order number in my file, but I want to pull in my customer and my item that they're ordering and all the stuff that I have in my Excel spreadsheet. But I don't know how I'm going to get the sales order number to continually grow while I'm reading this file. And that's what the next function does. So the next function basically looks, and it's giving me this error, but we're going to ignore that because next isn't a valid operation for account number. It would need to be like sales order number or something like that. But I'm going to leave it alone. And on the next function, what it'll do is it'll basically create, it's like hitting the button on the next batch number, the little pound sign with the arrow, or it's hitting the button like for the next sales order number. So it basically runs through the file, and every record it sees, it's going to create that next button. So if your sales orders and your next sales order number was 1, 2, 3, 4, the next one would be 1, 2, 3, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6, and so on. So the next function can be real helpful if you're utilizing it for entry of the data. So in a data entry batch or something to that effect. For this report, what we're doing here, we're not going to really mess with it. I'm just going to go ahead and replace this with column 3, like I said before. And keep in mind what I told you. If you don't hit cancel and you just keep jumping around in here, you're going to get that little glitch where you have to kill that default. Otherwise, it's going to come up and bug you every single time you run the import. So just something to keep in mind. So in here, I'm just going to say I'm going to replace this field with column 3. And I'm going to assign this, system assign the status. I'm just going to leave that as A. Let's talk about this for a minute. Because there are some things in there that aren't in my file, but why are they there? And why does it say assign? And why did it automatically do that? If I don't know what a field is or why the field exists that way, and to be perfectly honest, in this case, I'm not sure what status means in this file. I don't really deal with GL a lot. But in here, I can come back to my Resources tab. Resources tab, I can get to the bottom of it. So I can come down here, go into my file, layouts and program information. And this is a real, I love explaining this tool to people because I live by this tool and I breathe by this tool. So in my file layouts, it discusses every type of file that's in the Sage. So in Sage, if I want to look at what my general ledger structure is, I can go into this and I can see, oh, there's my GL account. Here's the layout for that file, exactly what it is and how many key fields everything is, and etc. So if you can see here, the account key is here. That's the name of the column. It's a multi-line 9-link long, right? So for this status field, I don't know what that field should be. Should it be A? Should it be something else? So in status, I don't know, so I'm going to look. It's 1 character long. The default value is A, and the valid ones are A, I, and D. So if you look here, active, inactive, and deleted are the status codes. So now I know my only 3 options for this field could be A, I, or D. And so I'm going to leave it alone, but I really wanted to show you how you could get to the bottom of what that information is. And this is a really cool tool to use, so I advise you guys to use it and learn it and love it. And if you guys, of course, have any questions on it or how to get to it, we can talk about or send out an email or whatever. So let's go ahead and go back here. I'm going to go ahead and get back to what we were doing. And on the status field, I'm just going to leave it as an assign, as a replace and assign with an A. So it's going to assign A to everything I have. On the clear balance, it's the same thing. I'm just going to leave it as yes. And my cash flows type, I'm going to leave it as an assignment of no. And then I'm going to use my company code. I'm going to leave it as default for the company code I'm in. So the other thing I want to do is I want to change the name. So I'm going to pull in my account description here, and I'm going to move it up. One thing I want to tell you, and you'll see the error sometimes if you're pulling in a zip code. So things to remember about the way that files are structured is, like, I have this account description here. It's all the way at the bottom. And sometimes if I run through this file and I try to pull this in, I'm going to get an error. And it'll say something like, you know, the zip code has to, or the state has to come before the zip code, or et cetera. The zip code has to come before the state. And it has to do with the way that Sage is processing through the record. So in Sage, if you were to go into a customer file and enter an address, you're keying in the information, you pop in the zip code, it pops in the state for you automatically and the location. The import works the same way. So if you were to try to put, you know, a state before a zip code, it's going to error out and it's going to tell you the zip code has to be above the state. And so this is a good example to use, because in this case, I don't want my account description to be my last field that I pull in. So I want to talk about these arrow up and arrow down. These have functions, and the function is to move the field up and down. So you can see I'm clicking on this. I'm moving the account description right underneath the account so that it comes in succession. So here I know the account description isn't column 6, right? It's column 2 on my file. So I'm just going to change this to be column 2. So it's going to look at the comma and then pull in the second set of commas, and that's that. So right now I'm just going to change this to, I'll just call it, this is a test. And we'll call this one okay, so I basically just gave it a different name for a description, and I'm pulling in the account from the file, and I'm going to ignore the rest of it. I don't care about all this other stuff here. And that's another thing you could do. So you might have, you know, 100 columns in your file, but you may only want 10 of them. It's a good idea to get into the practice. It's actually funny because I dealt with this yesterday with a customer. She kept looking at the Excel spreadsheet, and there was 20 columns, and I kept telling her, count over 3, and she was skipping the columns that she didn't need, and she was, you know, counting 1 at the column she needed and skipping again and then counting 2, when actually in reality it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So it's really important to realize that even though I may not want this field, it's still in a data format considered the first column. So you still have to count it when you're pulling in the account description. not like this is my column 1, right? So it's important to remember that the data file, the way that the data is set up, actually has to be pulled in that way. So this is always going to be column 2. And the only way it would ever change is if I were to take this and delete it. And then that would be column 1. So those are the types of things that are going to throw your errors. 90% of the time you're getting a failure, your records aren't importing. It's because your file or your replacement column or something like that is caused to error out because your data is wrong and your matching up of information is off. The other reason that it would fail is the length. So you might have, you know, a 10-digit account code or something, or you know, this is a good one to look at, like account code here. It can be 41 length. So if your account code is 57 in your other system that you're pulling data in from, you're going to have to trim it down to 41 to get it to pull into Sage. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So it's a cool, another cool little thing to look at is this account will always tell you what the length is. So if you're in Excel and you can easily see how many length your field is, if it's erroring out on account number, and I know that my Excel is 51 length, the reason why it's erroring out is because I have 51 and it's only allowing 41. So it will error out and not work. So it's a good, a quick little check on it rather than going through that other tool that I showed you, the file layout definition. You can easily get a visual here. If I pull in, you know, for example, like date start, you'll see it's formatted. And how is it formatted? Month, day, year, right? And it's a length of 10. So what does that tell me? It tells me that it's month, day, year, year, and that the dashes are included. So I can have it up to 10. So if you're pulling in an Excel format of a date that's not MMDDYY, you got to change it. So let's talk about that for a minute because it's important when you're pulling in date. If you're pulling in like a invoice date or a sales order date or whatever, you're going to want to change this date format. And the way you do that is here. You see how it has date mask? You can look at the date mask of the file that you're importing, and you can duplicate it here. So these are the most common programmatic date formats out there. So if you're getting a failure on a date record, make sure you click on the date record, come down here and change your date format or your date mask to the one that actually is what your file is set up to. The other option is to change it to whatever this default is, and usually it comes in as month, day, year. So another little quick tidbit of information there to kind of show you, the different variables that you can play with in here to get your data in correctly. Like I said, a lot of times when there's an error, it's usually in a format, or it's usually that the system is requiring the header to have something in some type of information, or you're just not, your data is off. There's something wrong with your columns, or there's something wrong with your data length or whatever. So those are the typical things that I see. So in here, I'm just going to go ahead and replace this now. I'm going to go ahead and set it up to run, and then we'll go check and see what it looks like. So in here, I'm done now. I'm going to go ahead and get ready to run this. So I'm going to purposely do something here that's going to give us an error, because I want you to see why. Okay, so you see kind of what happened here. I got 208 imported, and it shouldn't have imported. And the reason why is because I have this open. When you're importing a file, the file that you're working in has to be closed. So I'm going to go ahead and say no here. I'm going to close this down after I save it as GL export new. And then I'm going to bring up the Visual Integrator again. And I'm going to pull in the file that's not locked. So it's important to remember to close the file that you're working in, or the file that you're going to import in once you're ready to import it. And I'm going to call this, actually I need to change the name, I'm sorry. Name. It should already be CSV, but it's okay. Okay, so now I will grab the right file and we'll accept it and we'll execute it. And we should just get those two records. Let's test it. And there's our two records. And it both passed, so let's look at what changed. Okay, this is a test, pass, that's your account description. This is what it was. And I'm going to hit OK, OK, and now I'm just going to pull it in. And I didn't get any failures. Everything passed again, like I said. And if I go into my account now, I should be able to see that I changed the name of those general ledger accounts. Let's have a look. It's 100-00-00. And so you can see now that I've renamed that to this is a test. And the other one that I renamed, should have been A, is cash in my bank. So essentially what I just did is manipulated the data in Sage via an import and files in a record of that import. So that's the import function. One of the things I do want to show you, we have a little time, is I want to show you, this is a very clean and dirty, or clean and simple import. What I want to do is show you an import that's a little bit more complicated. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I just want to show you the difference in when I select the data. So I'm going to set up a new import. I'm going to call it SO. So I'm pretending now that I want to pull in a sales order file from, you know, another system or something to that effect. So I'm going to call this SO enter, and I'm going to grab my sales order table. Again, I was in AR, I can just click on SO, and then it'll bring me down to the correct thing. So if I click in here on the sales order header, what I want to discuss with you is the way that it sets up the lines and the header. So in here, I basically told it that I want to pull information into the header. But people will often say, how do I get it into the detail of the lines? How do I get it there? The Sage system is actually now set up to where the data is linking out header and line. So if you look in here, it inserted the required fields that I need. So if you look at the front of the field, do you notice here how it says H and this one says L? That's defining whether it's a header record or a line item record. So one of the things that I had an experience with just recently was we were importing in comment lines from an external source to Sage, and the lady kept entering in the header comment line, and she kept saying, well, the header comment's showing up every time I go into the order, it's showing up into the line comment. I said, well, do you have the line comment set? And she said, yes, I have the line comment set on the import. Well, what we figured out was that Sage has an actual trigger in the header that whatever you put in the header, as soon as you hit enter, it actually automatically drops it into the line tab. So that's something to be careful of. But the point of that is, when you're running through an import and you're doing a sales order, for example, or like an AR invoice, it's really, really smart idea to go through the process of that function manually. So go into invoice data entry or go into sales order entry and step through the process of creating an order. Because everything that comment line or that field stops on, or whenever you're hitting the enter button, you're going to need to either assign or import those fields into the file. And that's a good practice to get into because, like I said, with the comment line, we figured out that we were overwriting the comment line by hitting enter on the actual records once we got them in. So it didn't matter what we imported in for the line comment. It didn't care. It didn't matter because we were overwriting as soon as we hit enter. So things like that are important to know. But this is how you see what those records are. So if you'll notice on these data entry tasks, whereas it's a little different from the GL side, we didn't have the H and the L and all that information because there isn't a header and a detail for the GL account. But for things that do have a header and a detail, like the sales order entry, you're going to have the header and it'll say H, sales order number. And then if you go down, you'll see there's going to be an L and it'll be the item code and the item description and the quantity. So everything that pertains to the line item level, or what we used to call the sales order detail file. It's still called the sales order detail file, but in the import, it just basically links it for us, which is a really nice feature because it used to be really hard to link the sales order entry or header to the detail. You used to have to do it manually by using this configuration down here and doing a chain to. So you would chain it to or link it to another job. That's a good point to bring up as well. We still got a few more minutes. I'm going to stop here in a bit. Chain to is another good function. So if you have multiple imports that need to happen, so let's say you every day had a custom import that added all the customer information, because let's say each day you had new customers coming into your system that didn't exist in Sage. In order to key in the entries or the orders, you would have to have a valid customer record first, and that's logical. That makes sense. So how do you do that? I would set up a custom import for the customer first, so I'd create the customer record first, and then after I have that import built, I chain it to my sales order entry report, so I chain it to that new SO entry, and so now the customer record fires off first, it imports all the customers, and then the chain to automatically fires off the sales order entry, and they're linked together so that basically you do one and then you do the other and they all come in and it's all seamless and integrated. So that's what chain to does. It chains one job to the next. So when you fire off the first job, the automatic function is the second job. It automatically fires off. So that's kind of the gist of it. Go ahead and open it up for questions. I know we'll probably get into some more detail on the configurations, and we'll probably do another one on the more advanced features with calculations and things. But go ahead and ask any questions if you have any. And Sherry, I'll open it up to you.
Lines are now open for any questions. Christopher and Owen, I don't think you entered your, oops, I got it. Owen, I can't seem to unmute you. You might not have entered your audio pin.
No, I just muted myself because there's some noise where I'm at in the background.
Oh, perfect, thank you.
Can you hear that noise?
We can hear you now, thank you. So are there any questions for George on the Visual Integrator processes that we've seen?
I had a question on maybe something that he didn't go over. I came in a little late, but I had a question about changing or deleting data. And
okay,
the question is, like if I was wanting to create new POs and enter them using Visual Integrator, I know how to do that. But what if I wanted to change a PO or remove a PO? Is that possible?
You wouldn't be able to delete the record. You could, what version are you on right now? What version of Sage?
Well, this probably would be done after we upgrade because we're going to upgrade soon to 2017.
Okay, because I know, so in the older systems like 2013s, 2012, or 2014s, those systems didn't, the PO system wasn't designed like sales order, and it didn't have history. It had history, but not built like the sales order. They modeled it after the sales order history functions in 2015. Well, prior to that, you could just go in and delete. You could do a giant job to delete the invoice, but now because it exists in multiple places, you'd have to delete it out by completing it, closing it, and then purging it out the right way. But if you wanted to do a
purchase orders, not really invoices or history.
Yeah, exactly. So if you wanted to do like a bulk edit or like change a PO, like change, let's say you wanted to change a quantity or add a quantity to it, you could do an import for that, and it will overwrite data that exists prior, or if you're actually pulling in the data that, like if you're pulling in, like say you want to change a PO number 912 to 912, but you want to change some information in that PO, we'll do that. If you want to change 912 to 913, then it would just create 913 if it didn't exist. So 912 would still be there. 913 would also be there.
You're talking about PO numbers when you say 912 and 913?
Exactly.
Well, what if I wanted to change like an item number on a PO, a line item, and I wanted to change the part number, the item number? Is that possible?
If the PO is open and hasn't had any receipts against it, you can modify the import to pull into the line.
Oh, okay.
So you would be able to.
Well, I guess maybe it's too much detail for today, but I'd be curious to know how you specify which line you want to overwrite.
Yep, and you can do that. There's a line item, there's a line number there, a sequence number, and you can hit the sequence number. So I could get you some detail on it. If you just provide me your email address, I'll send you some documentation on it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And then, of course,
George,
if you need
George, you have his email on that registration list that I sent you, so you do have his email.
Okay. Perfect. All right, any other questions?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat window, and I'm not seeing any hands raised. Okay,
all right, well, we
if
got 3 minutes.
If anything does come up, you can always reach out. Oh, go ahead.
Another thing we're thinking about doing is importing transactions and like adjustments, and that's a real challenge because there's different accounts that have to be chosen when they do that. Have you ever heard of anyone doing transaction imports?
Yep, absolutely. But they made it actually super simple now using this thing called GL Exchange. It'd be really interesting to know what version you're on because some of these tools are available to you out there already.
Oh yeah, again, that we'd have version 2017 before we would implement that.
Yeah, then you'll have GL Exchange in it, and it's a real functional piece of. It's a new addition, obviously, but it's a really functional piece. We've used it to do multi-company integration, do transaction and things like that from Excel. We've used it for pulling in transactions from QuickBooks into Sage. So it's a built-in tool to Sage, and it's just like a wizard. You click on a button, tell it what your file is, and then you import it in. So I think they're going to do Sherry, do you have a lunch and learn scheduled for the GL Exchange stuff? I thought you did. Maybe not.
I have nothing scheduled yet. This is our last one for March, and April is not scheduled. So we'll be looking into that. We don't necessarily do GL Exchange. We could do a course on GL Exchange, George, hint, hint. But we have basically GL or business insights, that type of thing. We have not scheduled one for the GL Exchange, but it's good food for thought. I'll look into it.
So if I understand, GL Exchange is another way to import data that doesn't use Visual Integrator?
Only, yes, but only for general ledger.
Wow, okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
No problem. And then keep in mind, if you get stuck on any of this stuff, you guys can always just reach out to the support queue, and any of us can help you with the GL Exchange stuff.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all my questions.
Okay, everyone. Well, thank you very much for attending. George, thank you for that very interesting presentation. Please note, when you get your thank you for attending, there's a survey attached. If you would take a minute to take that survey, we appreciate it. We're always looking at improving our webinars. We will be sending out the April schedule of events at the end of this month, so keep an eye out for that newsletter. Also, Sage Summit is coming up in May in Atlanta, Georgia. Please join us. If you haven't registered, please register. We do have a special $99 price for ISM clients, so reach out to me for that information. It's an event where you will gather a lot of information, network with peers, and learn everything you never needed to know about Sage and all third-party applications. We will be there. A part of our team will be there to walk you through, to help you in any way possible, and it would be great to meet you face-to-face. So again, please look at Sage Summit. Everyone, thank you very much and have an amazing day. Thanks.
Thank you.